The camera pans across the glittering skyline of New York City at dusk. Skyscrapers gleam with golden light, their windows reflecting ambition, greed, and dreams. In the heart of that city sat a man who thought he had everything money could buy. His name was Richard Moreau, a billionaire, jet-setter, and self-proclaimed king of the skies. With a fleet of private planes, a sprawling empire of investments, and a reputation as a ruthless tycoon, Richard never missed a chance to flaunt his wealth or belittle those he considered beneath him. But sometimes the people you mock the most are hiding the very secret that can change your destiny. It was a crisp autumn morning at JFK Airport. Richard was preparing for another one of his lavish getaways. A small crowd of business partners, socialites, and curious bystanders had gathered near his private hangar. His latest toy, a gleaming white private jet with his initials engraved in gold, sat waiting like a beast ready to take off. The air buzzed with the arrogance Richard carried everywhere. He strutted down the tarmac in a tailored navy suit, his Rolex flashing under the sun, his expensive cologne leaving a trail. Cameras followed him, women whispered, men admired, but secretly resented him. "Ah," Richard smirked, raising his glass of champagne. "Another beautiful day to remind the world that money buys wings." His entourage laughed on cue. They always did. No one dared to cross him, at least not openly. And that's when it happened. Near the plane, a black man in a janitor's uniform was wiping the wheels of a nearby service cart. He wasn't tall, but his presence was solid, grounded. His hands were rough, his posture straight. His name was Daniel. He kept his head down, focused on his work. He had been working at the airport for years, cleaning, repairing, sometimes unnoticed, sometimes ridiculed. Richard noticed him and smirked. "Ah, look at this, the real engine of America. The cleaners, the invisible hands. Tell me, Daniel," he squinted at the name tag pinned to his chest, "do you ever dream of touching the sky, or are you too busy scrubbing its floors?" A ripple of laughter shot through the crowd. Daniel didn't react at first. He kept polishing the cart. But then he looked up. His eyes met Richard's, calm, deep, piercing, like a man who had seen storms bigger than this arrogant millionaire could imagine. "I don't just dream of the sky," Daniel said quietly, voice steady. "I've flown higher than you think." The laughter died down. Richard tilted his head, amused. "Oh, really? You've flown? What, a mop with wings? Tell me, janitor, what do you fly? Paper planes during your lunch break?" More laughter. Richard basked in it. He lived for moments where he could reduce someone with his words. But Daniel didn't flinch. His silence was unsettling, his composure unusual. Richard, fueled by the attention, stepped closer. "Tell you what," he said, raising his voice so all could hear. "I'll make you a deal, Daniel. Fly this plane," he pointed dramatically to his gleaming jet, "and I'll marry you off to any woman in this crowd who dares say yes. Heck, I'll even put $1 million on the table. Fly this plane and you become a millionaire overnight." The crowd gasped. A mixture of laughter, disbelief, and curiosity filled the air. A cleaner, flying a jet? Impossible. It was just Richard being cruel again. One of Richard's girlfriends, a tall model in a red dress, giggled and whispered, "He can't even start the engine, darling." But Daniel's gaze never left Richard. His expression unreadable, but his eyes, they carried something ancient, something that unsettled even Richard's arrogance for a split second. The narrator's voice grows dramatic. And that single moment was the beginning of a game Richard never thought he'd lose. The entourage moved closer to the plane. Richard walked with exaggerated swagger, sipping his champagne. Daniel remained by the cart, silent. He could have just ignored the insult, walked away, swallowed it like every worker before him. But something inside him stirred. The sound of a distant plane taking off roared above, its engines echoing freedom. Daniel's jaw tightened. His hand brushed the old worst wristwatch he always wore, scratched but still working. It was the only thing he had kept from his past, a past no one at the airport knew about. A businessman in the crowd sneered. "Come on, Richard, don't waste time with the janitor. We have a flight to catch." But Richard was intoxicated by the moment. He wanted a show. He wanted everyone to laugh, to cheer, to remember his power. "Get up here, cleaner," Richard taunted, gesturing toward the stairs of the jet. "Show us what you've got, or admit that you're nothing more than a floor sweeper." The silence was heavy. Everyone stared at Daniel. Some pitied him. Most expected him to shrink away, to mutter an excuse and keep cleaning. But then Daniel put down his rag. He straightened his back. His eyes flicked to the plane, then back to Richard, and slowly he began walking toward the jet. Gasps echoed. "Wait, he's serious?" someone muttered. Richard's grin widened. "Oh, this will be priceless. The cleaner thinks he can fly." The cameras were out now. Phones recorded every step Daniel took toward the stairs. This was going viral before the engines even started. Richard leaned toward his girlfriend and whispered, "By tonight, everyone in New York will know me as the man who made a cleaner think he could be a pilot." Daniel placed his hand on the railing of the stairs. For a moment, he paused. His thumb brushed over the metal, the texture familiar. Too familiar. Then he climbed, step by step, until he disappeared into the cabin. The crowd erupted in chatter. Inside the cockpit, Daniel's hands hovered over the controls. His breathing was steady. His eyes scanned the dashboard, the instruments, the dials. His fingers twitched with a muscle memory buried but never forgotten. He closed his eyes. Flashback. The roar engines, the heat of the desert, a different plane, years ago. His hands on the throttle, a voice in his headset. "You're cleared to take off, Captain Daniels." His eyes snapped open. He wasn't just Daniel the cleaner. He was something else, something no one here knew. Back outside, Richard tapped his champagne glass with a grin. "What's the matter, janitor? Forgot your feather duster? Need me to show you how to buckle in?" But then, the engines hummed. A low vibration rattled the hangar floor. The crowd froze. Richard's smirk faltered. Daniel's hand pulled a lever with quiet confidence. Lights blinked across the dashboard. The plane came alive like a beast woken from sleep. The whir of turbines filled the air. The crowd gasped louder. He knows what he's doing," someone whispered. "No way. He's just pressing random buttons." But his voice had lost some of its certainty. The engines roared to life, their thunder swallowing the laughter. The ground shook. The air trembled. The jet was awake, and Daniel was in control. Richard's jaw dropped. His glass slipped from his hand, shattering against the concrete. And in that instant, the billionaire realized he might have just mocked the wrong man.
The jet engines thundered like a heartbeat rising from the dead. Dust and loose papers whipped across the hangar floor as the giant machine came alive under Daniel's gutch. The crowd outside clutched their coats, eyes wide with disbelief. No one expected this. No one could have imagined the janitor knew the sequence, the feel, the rhythm of controls that only trained pilots dared to touch. Richard, for the first time in years, stood speechless. His arrogance faltered, a crack forming in the mask of invincibility he wore. He had expected comedy, a cleaner fumbling and pressing wrong buttons. Instead, he was watching precision. Inside the cockpit, Daniel sat tall, hands steady on the throttle, eyes darting over the instruments with quiet confidence. He didn't hesitate, he didn't guess. His fingers moved with the assurance of someone who had done this countless times before. His breathing synced with the engine's pulse. "Flight systems operational," he muttered under his breath, the words flowing like a ritual he'd memorized long ago. His reflection on the glass showed not a cleaner in a faded uniform, but a man who once commanded the skies. A voice from the cabin door broke through. It was Richard, storming in, red-faced. "What the hell do you think you're doing? Get out of my cockpit before you break something." Daniel turned his head slowly, eyes calm. "Engines are live, altimeter calibrated. She's ready to move." Richard froze. The words weren't random. They were the words of a pilot. His girlfriend, standing just outside the door, gasped. He sounds like he knows this plane." Daniel didn't wait for Richard's approval. His hands gripped the yoke gently, testing its weight, the way an old soldier might handle a sword long left in storage. For a fleeting moment, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. Flashback. Years earlier, Daniel stood on a scorching runway in a desert nation far from America. His uniform crisp, his captain's stripes bright against the morning sun. He was not Daniel the janitor back then. He was Captain Daniel Okoro, one of the youngest and most skilled pilots in his country's Air Force. The voice in his headset barked, "Eagle Wern, you are cleared for takeoff." He pushed the throttle forward, and the fighter jet screamed into the sky. His body pressed against the seat, but his spirit soared. For Daniel, the sky wasn't just freedom, it was home. Back to present. Daniel's eyes glistened as he blinked away the memory. Richard slammed his hand on the console. "You're bluffing! A janitor doesn't know how to fly jets! You probably watched the YouTube video or something!" Daniel's voice was even, firm. "This cockpit isn't a stranger to me." The crowd outside pressed against the windows, filming, whispering, buzzing with speculation. The millionaire's humiliation was already trending online. One man muttered, "Wait, I've seen this guy before. Wasn't he in the Air Force?" Another replied, "No way, he cleans bathrooms here." But doubt was spreading. Richard, desperate to regain control, sneered, "Fine, if you're so confident, take her out. Taxi her down the runway. Show us you're more than a mop with a dream." Daniel's gaze hardened. He had sworn never to return to this life. He had left it all behind for reasons that cut deep. But pride was a dangerous thing, and Richard had awakened it. He pushed a lever. The jet shuddered, then began to roll slowly forward, wheels turning, engines humming like thunder restrained. The crowd erupted into shouts. Some screamed in fear, others cheered. "He's moving it!" Phones captured every second. The internet would eat this alive. Richard stumbled back, his face pale. For the first time, he wasn't in control of the story. Daniel guided the jet forward with flawless ease, taxiing it across the tarmac. His movements weren't reckless. They were smooth, deliberate. He wasn't proving something to Richard. He was reconnecting with a part of himself he had buried. As the jet slowed to a stop, Daniel powered down the engines. The beast went quiet, leaving only the stunned silence of the crowd. He sat still, hand resting on the throttle, breathing steady. Then he stood, walked out of the cockpit, and faced Richard. "You said if I fly it, you'd marry me off to anyone here and make me a millionaire," Daniel said calmly, his voice carrying in the stunned silence. "I just flew your plane." Richard's jaw tightened. His lips parted, but no words came. His pride was crumbling. The model in the red dress whispered to her friend, "He actually did it. Oh my God." The narrator's voice deepens. But Daniel's story was far from over, because the secret that had forced him into this janitor's uniform was darker, heavier, and far more dangerous than anyone there could imagine. Later that night, the video exploded online. "Janitor flies billionaire's jet" trended on every platform. Millions watched Daniel's calm defiance, his hands guiding the jet like second nature. Some called it a stunt, others called it fate, but the world was watching. In a penthouse overlooking the city, Richard paced furiously, smashing a glass against the wall. His ego was shattered, his power mocked. Everywhere he turned, he saw comments tearing him down. "Billionaire gets schooled by janitor." "The real king of the skies." "Cleaner humbles arrogant millionaire." His empire had always thrived on fear and respect. Now both were slipping, and it was all because of Daniel. Meanwhile, Daniel sat alone in his small apartment, the hum of the fridge the only sound. He stared at his old wristwatch, the one relic of his past life. He hadn't touched a plane in years, but today changed everything. A knock at the door startled him. He opened it to find a woman, tall, composed, dressed in a sharp black suit. Her eyes studied him like a hawk. "Captain Daniel Okoro," she said, using the name he hadn't heard in years. "You thought you could hide forever." Daniel's blood ran cold. His secret had found him. The woman stepped inside uninvited. "You shouldn't have flown that jet. You've drawn attention." His jaw tightened. "I didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice," she replied coldly. "And now Richard Moreau isn't the only one watching you. Others will come. They will remember who you are and what you did." He clenched his fists. "I left that life. I'm just a cleaner now." Her eyes narrowed. "Not anymore." The next morning, the world was buzzing, but Richard was plotting. His pride demanded revenge. He called in contacts, dug into Daniel's past, determined to find dirt. And what he found was far more dangerous than he anticipated. Air Force captain, covert ops, accused of treason, Richard muttered, scrolling through the classified files his money had bought access to. His lips curled into a sinister smile. So that's the janitor's little secret. He leaned back in his chair, eyes glinting. Perfect. If the world thinks he's a hero now, I'll show them the monster he really is. The narrator's voice rises, but what Richard didn't realize was that exposing Daniel wouldn't just destroy the cleaner. It would unleash a storm that could bring down everything, even Richard himself.
The storm had only just begun. For Richard Moreau, humiliation wasn't something he tolerated. Every second the viral video spread online, every mocking comment, every meme of a janitor pilot gnawed at his pride like fire on paper. He wasn't just mocked, he was dethroned. And Richard had no intention of letting a nobody, a cleaner, steal his spotlight. He paced his penthouse, eyes locked on the laptop glowing before him. Daniel's military file was sprawled across the screen, classified documents Richard had no right to see, but money and influence could buy anything. His grin was sharp, cruel. So, our dear Daniel is no janitor. He's a disgraced Air Force captain, a traitor, a fugitive. He leaned back, savoring the words, and now the world will know it. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel sat in his dim apartment, staring at the same old wristwatch he'd carried since his days in uniform. It ticked steadily, a reminder of the man he once was and the man he had tried to bury. The woman who had appeared at his door the night before had warned him. Eyes were on him again. His stunt in the hangar had blown his cover wide open. But Daniel wasn't afraid for himself. He was afraid for what would happen when the past came crashing into the present. The next morning, Richard made his move. At a press conference surrounded by flashing cameras, he painted Daniel as a fraud. "The man you saw flying my plane is no hero. He is a criminal who abandoned his duty, a man whose actions cost lives. He's been hiding as a janitor because he's too ashamed to face the truth." Gasps filled the room. Reporters scribbled furiously. Microphones buzzed. Richard thrived on the chaos, feeding off the power of words twisted into weapons. "This so-called janitor pilot is nothing more than a disgrace to the uniform he once wore." The footage spread instantly. Overnight, Daniel went from viral sensation to national scandal. News anchors debated his past. Some defended him, others condemned him. The same crowd that had cheered him at the hangar now turned suspicious, whispering about treason and betrayal. In his apartment, Daniel watched the headlines with a heavy heart. He had expected this, but the sting still cut deep. His past was always a shadow he couldn't outrun. But the story wasn't as simple as Richard made it sound. Flashback. Years earlier, Daniel had been part of a covert mission in the Middle East. Intelligence had been faulty, the target compromised. He had begged his commanders to abort, but orders were orders. The mission went forward, and it ended in tragedy. Civilians were caught in the crossfire, lives lost, and in the aftermath, blame needed a home. Daniel, outspoken, unwilling to stay silent about the failures of his superiors, became the scapegoat. His wings stripped, his name blackened, his life dismantled. He had fled, not because he was guilty, but because the truth was too dangerous for powerful men who wanted it buried. And now, Richard was using that same buried truth to destroy him. The narrator's voice grows urgent. But fate wasn't done with either man, because the skies that connected them were about to test them both in ways they could never imagine. 2 days later, Richard hosted a lavish gala on his private island. Wealthy elites, politicians, and celebrities filled the ballroom. Cameras flashed as Richard boasted about his empire, desperate to repair his image. And in the hangar nearby, his gleaming private jet sat fueled and ready for another display of wealth. Richard, smirking, raised a glass to the crowd. "I promised the world I'd never let a janitor embarrass me again. Tonight, I prove it." But then, chaos. An alarm blared across the island. Staff rushed in, panicked. "Sir, there's an emergency. One of the engines on the jet has malfunctioned. If it ignites, the entire hangar could go up." Gasps filled the gala. The jet was too close to the main hall. Everyone could be in danger. Richard paled. His prized possession, his symbol of power, was on the verge of destruction. Worse, his guests' lives were at risk. Cameras caught his fear. And that's when Daniel appeared. He hadn't come for revenge. He had come because he knew Richard would push him, expose him, endanger lives with his recklessness. Daniel stepped forward, his uniform still the janitor's, but his presence that of a man who knew exactly what needed to be done. "I can stop it," Daniel said firmly. Richard spat. "You? You'll just make it worse." But the fear in the room silenced Richard's arrogance. Guests pleaded, "Let him try. He flew your jet before." Richard's jaw clenched. He hated it. He hated needing Daniel. But the risk was too great. Finally, with venom in his voice, he hissed, "Fine. But if you fail, everyone will see what you really are." Daniel didn't waste another second. He sprinted toward the hangar. The doors opened, revealing the jet trembling as smoke hissed from one of its engines. Heat shimmered in the air. The ground crew scrambled, unsure what to do. Daniel climbed into the cockpit. His hands flew across the controls, assessing, stabilizing, shutting down systems in the precise order only a seasoned pilot knew. His brow beaded with sweat, but his movements were swift, confident. Outside, the crowd held its breath. The smoke thickened, then began to fade. The engine coughed, shuddered, and slowly powered down under Daniel's control. Silence. Then cheers erupted. He had saved them all. Richard stood frozen, humiliated again, this time not by mockery, but by Daniel's undeniable heroism. Cameras captured every second, the janitor who saved the lives of millionaires, the disgraced captain who proved his worth in the skies once more. And then, the twist. The woman from before, the one who had visited Daniel, stepped into the hangar. But now she wasn't just an agent in black. She was accompanied by government officials. Her voice rang clear. Daniel Okoro was never guilty. He was framed to protect corrupt commanders who botched an operation. The truth has come to light. His record is cleared. His honor is restored. The room gasped. Reporters rushed forward, cameras flashing. Richard's scheme to destroy Daniel had backfired spectacularly. Daniel stood tall, eyes locked at Richard. "You mocked me because you thought I was small, but sometimes the ones you step on are the very ones who can lift you, or bring you down." The narrator's voice softens, dramatic. And in that moment, the millionaire who thought money could buy the skies was humbled by the cleaner who had once called the skies his home. The government agents approached Daniel. "Captain, the country needs men like you again. The choice is yours." Daniel looked at his old wristwatch, then at the crowd. For the first time in years, the weight of guilt lifted. He wasn't just a janitor. He wasn't just a scapegoat. He was a man reborn. Richard, red-faced, stammered, This isn't over." But it was, because the world no longer laughed with Richard. They laughed at him. And Daniel had found his wings again. The final shot. Daniel walking toward the runway at sunrise, the light catching his silhouette as a plane roars to life behind him. The narrator closes. Never underestimate the one you mock, because the secret they carry might just be the wings that lift them higher than you'll ever reach.